So it's just kind of like when you have an expectation about how a certain experience should be, and you create a model of it in your mind, and it ends up just being an egoic projection rather than something that's received in a most innocent, fresh, in spirit of surrender, where the ego has dissolved itself.
And I think that's relevant because from what I even notice in the art world, authenticity is the most important thing for long-term success in all walks of life. And same as your spiritual development, I think you have a unique soul that is attracted to unique things and is here to experience unique things to integrate in your soul, in the same way that your art is, if you follow your own path without too much external or preconceived ideas that you're seeking, you'll have a product at the end that is so unique that it will have the impact it's supposed to have. And the same with your soul in a way. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blue Hour podcast, where we explore the minds and the worlds of visionary artists and creators. This week's episode is with my most reoccurring guest on the show, Amir Mourad, my spiritual teacher for the past many years, who has been helping me have more critical thinking when it comes down to these mystical experiences and the realm of the spirit. Amir is the founder of Shunya Yoga. He's also a musician and a contemporary mystic who spent 6 years in isolation trying to dismantle the structures of the mind. In this solar segment, we're moving past the highs of spiritual tourism to discuss the mechanics of true perception. We dissect the trap of experience hunting, the difference between simulated enlightenment and authentic integration, and the sheer speed of perception required to see reality before the ego projects an identity onto it. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week we're going to launch also the lunar segment with Amir, where we're going deeper into the emotional body. And Amir shares a very ancient yoga technique, specially designed to dissolve the ego boundaries discussed today. So you'll need that practice to integrate today's teachings. And before we step in the episode, I want to talk about the Roze Ephemeris event that was just launched last week. And we had a lot of people join from the Visionary Art Grant that was launched also this year by Roze Umbra, offering grant to visionary artists. And this event became a way for me to take all of the applications, see the common themes, and share it with you guys so you can understand what is the common visions coming from the ether into the minds of these visionary artists. And the replay is officially now launched on our YouTube page. You can see in the last video, it's there already waiting for you guys. And in this video, I've also integrated, because the new year is coming very quickly, I've integrated how to find your personal year number so that you understand the energy that's about to come in your life and which planet rules this energy. It allows for a better preparation for what's to come for all of us. But all in all, we are in this universal year of the sun. So expect a lot of radiance, some ego clashes, but all the details are in this previous video. And I'll put it in the links below as well. Now take a deep breath and join me for this masterclass on the art of dying and the speed of perception with Amir Mourad. All right, welcome Amir to this
Thank you for
third
having me.
episode on the Blue Hour podcast with me. We're at the beautiful park in Montreal, your hometown where I used to live, and where we've been seeing each other. Actually, we used to meditate together right beside here, where there's someone living now. So
Many years ago, up the hill here.
Yeah,
We used to do some outdoor yoga.
yeah, that was the spot. So it's good to have this environment back on.
We also
as a
used to
stage.
practice down this direction in the middle of the field.
Yeah, we did that a few times.
I think once, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. So you were saying you want this episode to like be more of a. Usually, we have like a little theme when we start, but this time it's like a fresh start where we just kind of get inspired by the moment, in our environment and our soul, to kind of create a dialogue with whatever comes up. So is there a topic or subject that's on your mind and your heart these days that you want to introduce this podcast with, this episode with?
Yeah, the importance of integration. Integration is such a fundamentally important concept. I think it's even beyond enlightenment. even enlightenment is a very vague term because really in spiritual process there's only degrees of seeing, degrees of clarity. And seeing can happen for a brief moment, that's very sudden and it's temporary, and like all experiences, it moves with the stream of impermanence. There's no experience that lasts forever, and that's the field of our life. We're living in a universe of impermanence. So you can have clarity for a single moment, or you can have an immense breakthrough experience and then for days afterwards you feel like you're on a high, or the drug is slowly taking you to a climax, and then it subsides, like there's a crescendo and a decrescendo. And then there's integration, which is like a continuous way of being, and how do you embody yourself in the field of impermanence while still preserving your most authentic nature. And I think that's far more important than relying on any single experience. Actually, if you go experience hunting, it can be quite an ego-reinforcing process.
How so?
When you're clinging after experience, you're kind of simulating in your mind an egoic version of what that experience would be.
You said hunting?
Experience hunting, hunting for experiences.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. I thought you were talking about the actual, like...
No, experience hunting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like when you have an expectation about how a certain experience should be, and you create a model of it in your mind, and then you do all kinds of spiritual practices and endeavors to kind of replicate that or simulate. You try to follow that simulation, and it ends up just being an egoic projection of what you have been imagining, rather than something that's received in a most innocent, fresh, in spirit of surrender, where the ego has dissolved itself.
And I think that's relevant because from what I even notice in the art world, authenticity is the most important thing for long-term success in all walks of life. And same as your spiritual development, I think you have a unique soul that is attracted to unique things and is here to experience unique things to integrate in your soul. In the same way that your art is, if you follow your own path without too much external or preconceived ideas that you're seeking, you'll have a product at the end that is so unique that it will have the impact it's supposed to have. And the same with your soul in a way. So
yes, the trick is really to blend the conceptual mind with the non-conceptual mind. And that's kind of what I meant earlier by integration. The mind is clouded by thoughts and mental projections and emotions and feelings and sensations, and we're often very much entangled in all of that. But how to be as if your foot is in one world and another foot in another world, which is you're involved in all of that and yet your perception's not tied down by it. You preserve that clarity of perception. So action and yet freedom within the heart of action. This is really like the key to integration. And I think it's very helpful to kind of have a technical understanding of how our perception works, because I believe speed has a lot to do with it. I've kind of like taken a step back and tried to, because there's many things that I understood on an intuitive level, and I spent some time contemplating on like what are the mechanics of this. Because I feel like when you have a theoretical understanding combined with your intuitive experience, it illuminates the matter even further. And also when your intellect gets refined, you can kind of pinpoint the blind spots that you might have that's holding you back from a more deeper understanding. So I think it has a lot to do with the speed of perception. The speed of perception.
Which is relevant to how present you can be.
Yes, like there's a moment where as the senses are coming in, the stream of the senses, where the impressions just strike your mind in the most raw and authentic way. And that is a point in your experience where there's an absence of egotism, an absence of attachment to mental projections. So how can you be like in that zone and insert your alertness into it so that you're always preserving this mind that's free of mental projections, or that ordinary, it's actually a very ordinary mind. It's your mind unfiltered. It is the raw, authentic energy of your own mind's essential nature.
So it's like in the full journey, it's the fool that is untouched, is still a virgin in the world, and is just experiencing things without judgment, you know.
No, not quite. No. I mean, what's judgment? That's kind of close to it, but it's not exactly accurate. Because how can you live in the world without judgment? You have to be able to make judgments in the world around you. You need to survive in the body.
Maybe
you need to be able to discern what is truth and what is untruth. You need to discern what is illusion and what is clarity. You need to know when you're entangled in your own noise of the mind. So judgment is necessary, but how to be kind of non-judgmental with your judgments. It's a tricky thing. It's kind of like when you hear these very paradoxical terms like effortless effort, or desireless desire, or karma without karma. All these kind of contradictory terms. So it's a bit of a paradox. So that's why we have to like clearly define what do we mean by judgment. Does judgment mean like looking at something and then having a concept arise in your mind? So then you have to ask, is it possible to live in the world without language or without conceptual thinking? And how can you be integrated in the world without conceptual thinking? So how do we approach our conceptual thinking without it becoming a burden for our well-being?
Yeah. So how do you do it in your own art, in your own music, to achieve
I think
that?
it has to do with what I was saying, being connected to the sheer speed of immediate perception. The word in Zen, they have something called mushin. And mushin, it translates loosely into no mind. And it's not like the absence of the mind. What it really means is the mind that can act in the present moment, but without attachment to mental projections. So this happens at a certain speed because, think about it, like you can dissect it into 3 stages. One is the moment of pure perception. So the eye sees something, the nose smells something, the tongue tastes something. Then there's reaction to that. So the reaction is programming. It's like whatever is written on the programming based on past experience. Then there's the response to that reaction. And then of course there's like the response could be something to do with your physical action, or just how do you process things regardless of whether you physically act upon it. So it's quite a complicated sequence that goes through in any given experience. But just how quickly can you listen to the moment that a clear conception can arise within you? Unfiltered, without tied down by the boundaries of language, without being corrupted by the memory of the past. So this takes a very, very delicate sensitivity.
Is this something that has arisen for you to integrate or think about lately, or is this something that has been...
It's been continuous.
Yeah.
It's something that's always on my mind, like how to be even better integrated in the world and uncovering as many blind spots as possible, which is not even something I'm consciously thinking about. It's just kind of a byproduct of what happens when your life is soaked in mindfulness.
So how do you recommend people start this refinement of the awareness, or the...
I mean, even before we approach that, I feel like you have to genuinely feel the significance of this. It's like clarify the why. Why would you want to refine your mindfulness? And how much of a high priority is this for you? So it's like you live in a world where there's such speed and preoccupations, and people have responsibilities towards their family, their community, their work, their livelihood. How can you integrate this within all of that? And it doesn't mean you have to go live as a monk or an isolated yogi. It's really just, how is this compatible for the contemporary man? And in a way that's digestible. Because if I say something like you have to transform your whole life into one immense field of mindfulness, that might feel like it's such a mountain to climb and to conquer. So really you just have to start very simple. And before you even start to practice this, you have to clarify your why. It has to mean something for you. It has to that openness of the heart to let your life flourish in directions beyond its present boundaries, and knowing how temporary, ephemeral, and impermanent life is, that you want your life to flourish in newer directions, that you want to transcend your boundaries and your limitations, and to see that if there's not like an inspired desire for change, you're just caught in the same cycle of suffering endlessly. So it really would help even before that just to like sit, contemplate, and reflect on the way life has been lived, even from childhood up to the present. How much inspiration has really transformed your life, in other words? How much room, because the more you're open to unlearning, the more possibility you allow for learning. And it's very, very tricky business, because if you do not make this effort to recognize that life has been unsatisfactory and why it has been unsatisfactory, then all these efforts will be just like another ego hunting process. I think you have to like bring humility, recognize the significance of how self-knowledge involves sacrifice. And then if you feel inspired in light of these contemplations, then when you take action, they'll be empowered by the right kind of effort. It's a huge lesson to learn right effort, because effort is a vague term. I mean, it's a very simple word, but effort can be empowered and charged in dozens of different ways, because it's invisible, the energy that's empowering your effort, the quality of the mind that's empowering your effort. You would really have to listen very closely within yourself to know the meaning of any action that you're giving birth to. Like, what is that energy made of, and what are its consequences? It's like an arrow that's released from the bow. Depending like how you hold the arrow with the right focus, with how you're holding your posture, what's your target, what's your intensity of concentration, how open is your receptivity. All of that are like the conditions that are set so that when you release the bow from the arrow, it travels by that trajectory, effortlessly carrying the qualities of that energy.
It feels like in my own life lately, in the past 3 months, this has been something that I'm really reflecting and experiencing, and it's the dual nature that it seems like you're touching upon, the effort, which is kind of the fire element that exists within your kundalini, this primitive fire that is connected to everything and that will kind of give you, it's like, I see it almost like a lava coming out from the center of the earth, and it's available, but you need to be receptive, like your outer egoic outer self needs to be in passive mode. It's almost like reversing the natural tendencies of humans, which is you're a body, you're going out in the world. Now you're like a body, but that's going in the world and getting the data to inform the outer world to take action. And only when you get this refinement can your sensitivity to the inner world be, strong enough to pick up this lava and pull it out into the world in a meaningful way. For me, it's all about meaningful. Like, is it bringing value to you, to your deepening your connection with yourself, with the world, and is it benefiting others doing so? Like, is the outward motion serving anything good? Sure.
But becoming passive is a whole skill set on its own. It really requires a whole different kind of training to internalize the mind. Relaxation and calmness of the mind being the basic ingredients of that. You have to compensate what is lacking, and as a starting point, it makes complete logical sense that this is just our instinct, right? We're preoccupied by the environment, and that's for survival and safety purposes. So we're all hardwired to be hypersensitive to our environment for survival reasons. So this is like an ancient programming. So to reverse the current so that you start to internalize the mind and amplify with awareness what's happening in your inner world, it takes a whole other training. So once it's all about this medicinal quality of inviting the opposite to keep what is in excess in check. And then there's a third step. So first, cultivate what is lacking. We're predicting in all likelihood it is that passivity of the mind. But then the next step after that is to bring a homeostasis, meaning a fine balance between the active and the passive. Actually, in your nervous system, that would be reflected as a balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Yoga talks about it, of course, you know, in its own terminology, between balancing the Ida Nadi and the Pingala Nadi, the two channels of the spine, the left channel being Ida, the right channel being Pingala, one being passive in its quality, the other being active in its quality.
Would it be the anima and the animus too? Would this be
absolutely
like another layer of...
Yeah, the balance of opposites is something that's so multifaceted. You can look at it in several different aspects.
Yeah, like horizontally, but also like vertically.
Correct. Like you can look at the balance of opposites from a biological perspective, from a psychological perspective, from an energetic perspective. Like what I was just describing now about yoga was the energetic perspective. Balancing the Ida and the Pingala so that you activate the Sushumna.
Which is individuation in the Jungian terms.
Correct. But ultimately it all amounts to the same, which is finding an internal homeostasis where something can be passive, resting in pure consciousness, and another part of you can be active in the world of your body, mind, and five senses.
And in the tarot, what we just described is the art card. And it's meaningful because it feels like the best art is when these two polarities unite and marry the cosmic wedding and then create art. And then art becomes a product of this synthesis of inner and outer world. And it creates something that is so energized and so powerful in a way that it'll influence people on a conscious and subconscious level. That's what I've noticed with powerful art. It seems to have this... It's not just a product of that's describing outer tendencies, but it's also describing deep inner collective tendencies that are unseen and synthesized into an object.
Correct.
For me, that's like...
Yes, you're right. And it's tension of opposites. Like the tension between your consciously processing brain and your unconsciously processing brain. And inspiration happens kind of like in the interface between those two. The middle ground between those two. So it really does feel as an experience like you're traveling between worlds. Not necessarily like, because even a diehard skeptic cannot deny that there is anything that transcends the boundaries of your ordinary ego identity is always going to feel in some way or another transcendental to you. Is it really transcendental? That's like, what is there to transcend technically? What is there to transcend if at all times and all places it's just this reality? Right? It's the same energy manifesting in a billion different forms, but it's always the same energy. Right? Where is there to go? There's nothing to escape from. There's like this old story in Zen. There's a master Tozan. A student comes to him. He says, "How can we escape hot and cold?" Then the master replies, "Why not go to a place where there is no hot and cold?" Then the student replies, "Where is such a place?" Then the master replies, "When you're hot, feel hot. When you're cold, feel cold, through and through." It's just this. It's always just this.
It's almost like a radical acceptance of what is in the present moment.
Absolutely. It takes your third eye to be involved in appearances and yet not blinded by appearances. That's the real work of integration.
It's the tricky part for most humans is...
Yeah, but we've talked many times about the fundamental requirement being calmness and quietness of the mind, which is, I think, the first step of what you mentioned earlier, which is developing that passive quality to balance out what is in excess.
And from my experience, it's true, like when I have a good, thorough practice in the morning, it seems like this silence that is in my mind continues to influence me throughout the day. So it is one of the magical parts about meditation, basically like just cultivating this void inside yourself that allows to just be an observer, kind of like you just bring in a GoPro and you're just the GoPro looking at stuff.
Sure, but too much passivity is also a problem.
What would that be?
Being too dependent on, for example, some yogis, they get very cultivated in entering a thoughtless state of consciousness, and that becomes their blanket of security. They're constantly immersed in that state, and that becomes their escape from the world. Kind of like a desensitizing drug. That's one form of escapism. Or there's too much relaxation, but not enough alertness. It's also a huge problem.
So do you think like everyone that incarnates in this physical, dense world has something to play out? Is that
Meaning?
meaning like that monk that is isolated and in this pure passiveness for its whole life, do you think it's kind of beating the purpose of it actually incarnating in the physical reality, if you're not even part of it?
If the philosophy is that the physical body and the physical world has to be transcended, and that this physical existence is some kind of a curse in which you're trapped in a continuous cycle of birth and death, and you have to go through all these inconvenient rebirths and reincarnations, and oh, what a terrible game of life this is. It's just constant suffering, and the only resolution is to be free from the cycle of birth and death, then I would certainly say this is fostering very much an escapist mindset. Unless, on the other hand, that inspires you to transcend your limitations. It's really how you relate to some of these concepts. You're determining the meaning through the qualities of your efforts and your actions. Even the concept of hell can be extremely inspiring if you're approaching it in the right way. Even there was a master Hakuin, he heard a story about how there was a Zen master going back home. He got attacked by some bandits and he got murdered. So then he thought to himself, this was when he was very young, he said, oh, like if this guy who was such a dedicated, respected Zen master can one day be just murdered, what karma did he do to achieve this? How is this possible? And he was terrified of the idea that this could happen to a person. And he was also terrified, like I was saying earlier, he was terrified of the idea of hell. Because Buddhism talks about hell as well. So like indefinite suffering, that inspired him to seek a way of being that, how can I act in the world that's in alignment with the highest good, so to speak? Whatever that means, highest good. I would say it's trying to live in accordance with the law of the universe, the way of the universe, the language of the cosmos.
Which, again, to bring it back to art, I feel that most beautiful art is the ones that resonate with these forces. They seem to have embodied the cosmic forces, which is, I mean, there's many ways to describe it, and every human has a different way to interpret it. But symmetry, I don't know. For me, there's a lot about in nature that is all about balance, you know, integrated. Even a dead tree has balance because it'll reintegrate into something more refined and create something again that will rise up.
Yeah, a tree is such a beautiful metaphor for balance. Beautiful metaphor for many things. I like the idea of observing nature around you and just concentrating on what you're seeing. because concentration is like a magnifying glass. It will illuminate details that you were not paying attention to. Tree is a beautiful metaphor. Think about it, like the deeper the roots go, the higher the tree grows. And the roots are hidden from view. It's being supported by what is beneath the soil, but neither what is beneath the soil or above the soil is more or less significant. It's an integrated, interconnected system. The part of it that's within your vision and what is also outside of your vision, what is within the light and what is within the darkness. And the same is true with our inner being. There are parts of our being that are accessible to our perception and parts of our being that are naturally, by definition, hidden in darkness. And that's all part of the balance of the human condition.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of it.
Like, and what I also, just last thing, what I also like about the idea of a tree is the evolution of the tree. Like you give it the right amount of nourishment, it flourishes above the soil as well as beneath the soil.
Mm-hmm.
So its path of evolution is multifaceted. You evolve in your outer life and you evolve in your inner life, and they're both parts of the same integrated whole.
And even deeper than that, its own nourishment comes from two sources, the minerals and then the solar cosmic forces, right? The sun gives the food to the leaves, and then the nourishment coming from all the dead things from all the past that exist in the mineral form in the soil that just rises up, and they kind of give each other their nourishment to continue growing in their respective ways. Which is kind of a beautiful way to translate that to us humans, getting like information from above, inspiration, but also connecting with our DNA, with our cells and our like biology inside of our bodies, and nourishing it through, plentiful like nourishing foods that have these minerals as well, and water that is filtered and mineralized also. That's what we need to kind of unite, I guess, would be in the heart, in the creative centers, uniting both.
What is real nourishment? Mind medicine. Medicine for your body, medicine for your mind. I think the key to having a medicinal approach to well-being is just that concept I mentioned earlier. Learn to consistently invite the opposite. For that, you must do the right analysis to see what is out of balance and what is in excess. How will you do that without striking self-honesty? That's why I mentioned earlier this whole principle about clarifying your why. The whole point is to do a mind calibration, so that from this mind calibration you can have such striking self-honesty that you're less likely to be biased. Even if some things you uncover might be shocking, you can still kind of process it in a way that's graceful. Often, I see this so often, people making genuine efforts in spiritual process, but in some way, they're deceiving themselves with a lack of self-honesty. Think about it. It's your ego's instinct to protect itself against its own annihilation. It's hardwired that it's a self-preserving mechanism. And if you're involved in spiritual process, there is no way to do this without some role that your ego has to play in the process. Right? It is a very significant part of the process. However, you cannot let the process be dominated by that.
Yeah. But that's why it's important to study your subconscious mind and seeing the programs in which you're reactive to, because if you don't know you're reacting to something until you know what the program is, and the program can only be studied in silence through your dreams, interpreting your dreams, and all these kind of sciences that bring up mirrors basically for you to get to the root of the cause. That's very important. Yes. And art for me is such a powerful way to do that, because you're naturally projecting your unconscious in your art. If you just study like how you're creating it, the steps, the angles you're taking to build your sculpture, the colors you're using, and what's on your mind and your environment as you're creating. That each is like a big puzzle that will inform what's going on behind the scenes and give you insights into, and I say art, but it's also life, how you're dressing in that morning, who you're meeting with, what you're conversing with, what's the thoughts you're emitting.
I think the artist learns a vital lesson that many other, well, I shouldn't say an artist in general because there's varieties of artists, but the matured, seasoned artist who's learned some significant lessons about themselves along their journey. I think one thing that's often learned is the thin dividing line between the dream world and the waking state. Because the artist is kind of traveling on the frontiers of those two worlds. And it's so true. Like our conventional way of understanding is that there are fine demarcations between the waking state, dream state, dreamless sleep state. And in fact, we find that it's not so simplistic. Actually, if you want to dissect it, there can be subcategories of these things. So for example, so let's look at like some subcategories to kind of just illustrate what I mean by this. Yeah, so there can be subcategories of this. So for example, there can be wakefulness in the dream state, lucid dreaming. What if we have wakefulness in dreamless sleep state? That is nirvikalpa samadhi. You know nirvikalpa?
No.
It's just the deepest state of thoughtless consciousness that can be experienced in meditation. It's like when all thought processes have come to a stillness, there's no egotism, there's no feeling, there's no emotion, there's just pure, undivided consciousness. That's kind of like being awake in this dreamless sleep state. Dreamless sleep is very similar. No thought process, no dream, no mental projection. Ego has at least temporarily disintegrated. So if that state was just, if you inserted one more thing, which is consciousness, it would be equivalent. What about dream in the waking state? Sleepwalking. People who do psychedelics can have those superimpositions of their imagination being projected like augmented reality on the physical world. Madness. Schizophrenia.
And it's true that there's a lot of artists that are in between all of those states, like of one of those categories.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like sometimes you feel either in a trance or close to that.
And then it becomes like, as you're creating art, like I think that's an art in itself, is creating the perfect state of mind for a specific type of art. So
Which
like,
in my opinion would be passion, coming back to those paradoxical words, like passionless passion,
and how do you
desireless
describe-
desire.
How do you describe that, in other words?
Passion minus the clinging of the mind. Passion minus seeking an ego substance.
I think Roze said like lust, but without a lust for results.
Lost, but without
Lust, like lust, L-U-S-T.
but without a lust for results.
Yeah, so you have the lust, but you don't need a specific result.
Yeah. Sounds like nishkama karma, actionless action. That leads us, I think, to an investigation of desire. It's a huge subject.
Yeah.
What is desire? What do we mean by desire? How many kinds of desire are there? Just like we were saying earlier, effort. There's different kinds of effort. Sometimes among Buddhists, like the Four Noble Truths of Buddha, the first noble truth is life is suffering. The cause of suffering, the second noble truth, the cause of suffering is desire. Bad translation, very bad translation. There's the word for, in the Buddhist terminology, tanha. Tanha means like a hunger, a thirst. It's more than desire. It's a subtle or acute or chronic addiction. This craving after experience, this clinging after experience. So there's desire minus that clinging, in desire plus that clinging. And they're fundamentally different in quality. And there's shades in between. Because even when there is clinging, what's the intensity of it? Is it light? If it's light, you have a light form of ego. If it's moderate, then you have a moderate form of ego. If it's intense, you have an intense form of ego. So it's really quite, in a way it's simple, but when you dissect it, you see like, oh my goodness, like we're using these words so casually with our preconceptions, but only a thorough contemplation will illuminate all these specialized details. You know? And that's why I think like when we refine our knowledge and become more integrated within, we have to combine that there's two planes of analysis. One is like a generalized level of analysis, and then there's a specialized level of analysis. And we kind of have to combine those two together. A generalized level of analysis or generalized knowledge is kind of like when you're just giving a general diagnosis of an issue. Or if you're able to express a certain insight in the most simple, direct, and straightforward way possible. Just bullet point. For example, seek and you shall find. Bullet point. Simple maxims that many people have heard of. But then it has to be complemented by that specialized level of knowledge. And that needs work of contemplation. You can say as a bullet point, Buddha's first noble truth, life is suffering. It's generalized knowledge. But then specialized knowledge. What's the structure of suffering? What is the mechanics of suffering? The anatomy of it. How does it come about? What contributes to this? And how do we understand the nature of suffering with such accuracy that if suffering is a habit, we expand our knowledge to such a degree that our knowledge overwhelms the habit itself. Then we attain certain quote-unquote mastery over that habit. So generalized level of analysis, specialized level, combine those two worlds of knowledge, and you have a much more complete...
But then the question is, how do you get that specialized type of knowledge?
Contemplation.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking too.
Which is more than tranquility.
Because some people would say science, but then for more abstract and value-based things, it's like it's hard to dissect it with like the
But there is a way you can integrate scientific knowledge with that. For example, let's say you were contemplating on the dying process. What does science say, or everything that is scientifically known about the dying process? What are the stages the body goes through in the dying process? What happens in the shutting down of the organs? Psychologically, from what we know, what tends to take place? What do we know about stages of decomposition of the body after death of the body? Now imagine if you took all of that data and information and integrated it into a method of contemplation, such as, for example, you empowered by that knowledge, imagining yourself going through the dying process, making it realistic, not hypothetical. And that's the beautiful thing about contemplation. When your imagination and your concentration become so one-pointed, your brain does not distinguish anymore the difference between what is real and what is unreal.
So you experience it without experiencing it physically.
Yes, exactly. Your body will produce the same kind of reactions as though you were going through the process, or at least as close as within the vicinity.
So would you say if you could embody death in a moment, you could like actually reach very high, very deep levels of spirituality of your inner world?
You can come as close as humanly possible to dying without dying.
Yeah. So a lot of spiritual traditions in a way are helping you die without dying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in a strange way, to learn how to die without dying is a kind of rebirth. It's kind of like that whole myth reflected in many deities, whether it's like Dionysus or Jesus Christ or Osiris or all those sun deities,
Yeah.
which have seen the sun as a symbolism of a cycle of change and transformation, where a death is necessary in order to be reborn into a new way of being. And that takes sacrifice. And that takes a quote-unquote crucifixion of the ego.
There's a lot of these myths that are always based off the sun and the cycles of the sun, birth and rebirth, but we don't talk a lot about the moon and the lunar cycles. How do you think that plays in these myths? And
I think there's more of an emphasis on the sun, because, and the moon is seen as kind of secondary, because as has been illuminated by the study of the sky and astrology and astrology in ancient times, astronomy in more modern times, just our understanding of the sky, we see that all the systems are solar dependent. And all the light we see in the sky is not from any light of their own, they're all reflections of solar energy. And the moon is just another manifestation of that. Lunar energy is just reflected solar energy.
But it's also like more than that, because it creates magnetic fields on Earth, and it also creates the tides, which influence everything that is water, which is everything that is alive.
Of course, but without the sun, the moon would not be what it is. Even the gravitational pull, the gravitational force of the sun is so immense, it's holding all the other bodies, the planets and the other moons, even the moons of Jupiter, which are other moons.
Yeah.
All of that is being held in precise rotational orbits because of the gravitational fields, and it's all in part because of the influence of the sun. So if our sun disintegrates, our whole solar system disintegrates.
And
Of course, it's all an interconnected system and so forth. But I think there's many profound psychological reasons why some traditions have put more emphasis on the sun.
But also metaphorically, like I think in the Golden Dawn, like the sun is like the soul. It represents your core identity that is transcending humanity, like not humanity but physicality. And the moon would be kind of like the subconscious mind, which is like Yesod.
Of course, if you look at it metaphorically, then definitely neither should be more important than the other. Because we're back again to that theme of the balance of opposites, which is more on a cosmic scale than literally the sun and the moon. You know, these were used as metaphors for deeper cosmic principles in the same way that the elements, the idea of the elements of fire, water, air, and earth, are much more than the literal substances that they refer to. If you really want to understand fire, I mean, this is just an example of human beings being inspired by forces of nature and using those as contemplations for deeper abstract forces.
But I feel like learning this language, like you introduced me to this with, Israel Regardie too.
Yeah.
And this type of understanding metaphorically allows me to have a pre-programmed language to then interpret what I experience in a more meaningful way.
You know what's interesting? This ties into, again, some things we were talking earlier. I like how sometimes in our conversations we go down all of these specific rows, and then we find a way to circle back and then see how things get tied together. So this comes, like, remember when I said earlier about balancing conceptual knowledge with non-conceptual?
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting how do you balance the intuitive, metaphorical way of looking at the world, which is like more of the way of the artist, the poet, and the mystic, with the intellectual path. And I think it's very helpful to understand things in terms of evolution and involution. So what do I mean by that? The path of evolution in nature, whether we're talking about evolution of biological systems or the evolution of the universe from the singularity, the point of the singularity that became inflated manifesting as time and space and all the billions of galaxies and the chemical elements and so forth. There's a principle here. Whether biological or cosmic or psychological, this is the principle. Things are on the path of evolution if they start from a principle of simplicity, expanding into greater and greater levels of complexity. So it's like a hierarchy of complexity. Involution's just the opposite, where you're going from complexity to more and more greater levels of simplicity until you find radical simplicity. That is of such great simplicity that it cannot even be conceived by thought. Because even to think a thought would be traveling light years away from it. I think when it comes to, and that's kind of what happens when we're meditating. At least if you're thinking of those traditions about calming and tranquilizing the mind. We have this hierarchy of the complexity of the mind, and we're going in the reverse direction. From that complexity to a greater level of simplicity, deepening the silence until we find the most radical, what remains within you when all thought processes, feelings, emotions have come to a cessation. We find the foundation of knowledge, which is the pure consciousness. Outside of consciousness, there's no such thing as knowledge. And if there is no knowledge, there's no universe either, from the perspective of consciousness.
Seems like there's pure consciousness, and then there's also the recipient for pure consciousness to exist within.
Well, that's perception.
That's what you would call perception?
Yes. Because pure consciousness can exist but without perception. There has to be the recognition of. So, for example, there's dream. In the dream, there's consciousness. But lucid dream is when there's perception of the dream.
Okay.
So there's a knowing. So that's like actually a greater level of complexity. It's still not primordial simplicity. If there was primordial simplicity, there would be pure consciousness with no perception.
But like, if we talk like with the Kabbalah, it might be a bit advanced, but I'm still very curious. The sun would be the percepting faculty of like Baina and Hokmah. So if there's Hokmah is like the pure consciousness, and then it influences the sun like Tiferet. But what about Baina?
Intuition, perceptive intuition.
Oh, okay.
Hokmah would be like the pure will of consciousness, the pure creative force of consciousness.
Okay.
And then what is from like the hierarchy going downwards, the intuitive consciousness would receive that. But it's still kind of like receiving it in, I don't want to say a corrupted form, just in a different form. It's like the distance that has traveled from the light of the sun, it's traveled at a greater distance once it reaches so-called Baina. Once it reaches the intuition and it's processed through the intuitive lens, it somehow has traveled at a distance from the pure light of the sun. Same thing like when it travels to the body and you have intuitive feelings in the gross body. So this shows that there's diversity in nature. Not just oneness, but there's also diversity. How does the pure light of consciousness reflect itself through the intellect? You will have an illuminating intellect, but with still the specific features of the intellect, or logic, or feelings. So, but what I wanted to touch on actually, because we kind of went on a tangent, because I wanted it to tie to what you said earlier, is that when you travel towards greater and greater levels of simplicity, that's where the metaphorical and symbolic world starts to become more and more relevant. And when you travel towards greater and greater levels of complexity on the path of evolution, that's where reasoning, logic, and analysis is more better suited. You see? So that's why we have this built-in language in the terminology of many spiritual traditions, where we're using primordial symbolism of such simplicity, and we try to contemplate on that to arrive at those fundamental, simplistic forces of nature that thought cannot conceive. So fire. Even more than that, there's a contemplation on geometrical objects, like in Pythagorean traditions.
Tattvas.
Yeah, or like those mathematician mystics, Pythagoreans being one of them, but they have existed in India as well. So, you take like the concept of one, how do you represent that geometrically? Think of the simplest geometrical form conceivable to the human mind. A point. A point. So if you just close your eyes and concentrate on a point, see how the mind reacts to that. And then you can take it further up on the hierarchy, a slightly greater level of complexity. 2 points. Connect them together, you have a straight line. What is the implications of a straight line? So could it be that these geometrical forms, could we actually learn something from them? And learn from them in a way that is distinct and different than what thought can offer. Not to dismiss the significance of logic and the thinking process. Of course, there's some amount of thought still involved in this, because a point is a kind of thought. A line is a kind of thought. But we're reducing things to the most simplistic thought patterns
in a way,
humanity.
like to put another correspondence to this.
I want to say
Yeah,
one
go
last
ahead.
thing. Actually, this is what connects us to the world of archetypes.
The symbols, and it's in line with that. Like another way we could contemplate on. You said shapes, point, line. Also, like for a musician to just repeat the same note or like a frequency on a bell, the same, and see how this one sound vibration opens up a portal inside yourself. In the same way as like putting a big blob of color in front of you and just focusing on that frequency of color, of light, and seeing how you feel. This I feel is for any artist such a valuable tool before mixing them and creating a symphony with your music, to understand the vibration and the emotions, the thought patterns that arise from one sound, one note.
Yeah, and what's the choice of the note as well? Like in music, the root note, or the perfect fourth, or the perfect fifth, or the octave. And the Pythagoreans actually they used their mathematical mysticism to apply it even to music, where they could even see these cosmic principles, at least from their opinion and their perspective, that those cosmic principles were also involved in the construction of music, the construction of the musical intervals, and the mathematical proportions between, they're called the consonant intervals, which is like the basis of most of the music we can create.
And something that's arising in me while you're describing this is, even in shamanism, like how shamans, in a lot of cultures, native cultures, they would have an understanding of the sounds of nature as well, like wind, and also the archetypes that exist within our mind that are projected in clouds. So they could read clouds, they overlap with the wind, the direction they're going, and they could predict things. And nature has its own language that if you refine your understanding of yourself, you can start reading, like, how is nature communicating to your subconscious mind, and have a better understanding of the outer world as well.
May I just kind of give my feedback on that?
Sure.
I don't think it's as much learning about the world and more learning about our perception of the world. And really, the world beyond our perceptions is unknowable. Truly, truly unknowable. So that's why, like, when I think when we use these metaphors and symbolism, also acknowledge that, like when I was giving the symbolism of the elements, Chinese system of the elements is different. Fire, water, air, earth, wood and metal is part of their system, right? The correspondences or the associations can differ from one spiritual culture to the next spiritual culture. I think the antidote that will prevent us from being dogmatic when we're using these tools is to really understand them as instruments and tools to deepen our self-knowledge. So we must approach them in the spirit of non-attachment. And that's kind of fundamental to it.
Like not box them in and make them a structure that's rigid.
Yeah, like if I gave you a symbol of death, the symbol itself is less significant than the association it triggers within your subjective mind about death. So it's really highly individualistic. Of course, it all comes from a common ground, which is human nature, but it's also how it's being expressed in and through your individuality.
Yeah, that's why meditation is the first tool we should learn about how you are perceiving your outer world, and then learn the tools about symbolism to understand the outer world. So then you have both, kind of wraps around what we said also earlier.
I think we can agree that there is, would you say that there is a universe beyond our senses and our subjective experience?
I don't know.
In other words, if there's not a single observer on the earth, does the earth still exist?
I don't know.
Okay, so you're agnostic.
I'm agnostic about that.
Why are you an agnostic?
Because I've never experienced it inside myself, I guess.
What about all the evidence that shows that it's far older than biological life? We have rocks, we have geological...
Yeah, but perhaps like there is still some perceiving things that is not human.
Oh, so you mean like some fundamental consciousness to reality itself?
I guess, like if everything is a rate of vibration, if there's nothing that can absorb that vibration.
So that brings us back to this ancient debate. Is consciousness a byproduct of matter, or is consciousness fundamental prior to matter?
Exactly. I don't know.
You're agnostic. Okay.
What do you think?
I am open to a universal field of consciousness that spreads throughout time and space. Have I seen any evidence for that? Would a person say that in a near-death experience, when the individual projects outside of their body and they perceive events happening in a separate room that cannot be known otherwise because the body is in one room and events are happening in another room, and they project to that room and they report something like the coffee stain on the doctor's shirt there, and all that they can accurately report the objects in the room and the subject of the conversation? Does that prove that there's like a universal field of consciousness all pervading throughout nature, and we're kind of just experiencing from our individuality one small slice of that? I don't know. It's a mystery. I don't claim to know what is the nature of consciousness, except that it is a mystery. And could that be explained on purely biological terms? It's hard to say.
Yeah, it feels like without
it's hard to say. We don't even know all the mysteries of the human brain.
Yeah. But without the observer, it feels for me like it would just be like a big ocean of consciousness, which is kind of like just a big dream, but there's nothing that is experiencing the dream.
The thing I'm wary and cautious about with that theory is I'm very wary of theories that put human subjective experience at the center of the universe, because I feel it puts the mind at risk of ego reinforcement.
But not just human, just any...
Yeah, any experience.
In any other galaxies, there's another...
All life is hardwired to see things in its own image. And consciousness is still relatable. It's much closer to us than the profound unknowable, which is beyond all knowledge. Consciousness is at least still relatable to the mind than the vast unknowable in which there's nothing tangible to grasp onto. So it's still, in a way, a reflection, because it's still familiar to us, we still tend to grasp towards that familiarity. Same kind of thing like I think of it as a principle, creating a cosmic ego that is a reflection of the little ego. So we've done that in many different ways. We've done that in the form of the idea of God as a supreme being who has likes and dislikes and judges and punishes and rewards and heavens and hells, and no coincidence, the reflections of heaven and hells are just embodiments of what is found pleasant and unpleasant to the human mind, what is desirable and undesirable, and how many gods have existed, how many of them have become extinct, and this is just one more version of that. I think even if a person was attached to the idea of nothingness, that would still be an ego projection. In other words, any kind of attachment to knowledge is clinging after our ego self. So that's the only thing I'm wary about regarding universal consciousness. I'm still open to the idea. Like I said, that thing about projecting outside of the room and seeing things that are happening, and this is universally reported, and you can't say that it's a result of cultural projection. It's very much a human phenomenon, whether it's in India or in America or in Australia or in Europe. Atheist and theist, they have perceived this. What is the explanation for that? It's still an ongoing field. We know that even if the heart comes to a stillness, the brain is still functioning, as the science of resuscitation has revealed. But it's still an area of knowledge which we need more data about. I think in the very least we can admit consciousness is a compelling mystery. How do we even, first let's come to a meaningful definition of consciousness before we even speculate about those other possibilities of consciousness. How do you define consciousness is already extremely challenging.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'm sure in the next 20, 30 years, like as science is now, it seems to be a big theme in the scientific community, like the influence of consciousness on even like all the science of before, how they forgot that ingredient in all their experiments is like, well, I'm observing it, so I'm actually influencing it as I'm observing it. And that was never taken into account in all the experiments of the past. And it seems to be becoming a mainstream thought in the scientific community, more and more at least. So I'm sure like we'll get a lot deeper philosophical implications of this in the
There are some things we know
science.
for sure, which is consciousness doesn't depend on any one region in the brain. If there's a physical link with consciousness, beyond a doubt, it's the result of many brain regions in coordination. So if you look in the brain and try to dissect it and pull out and pinpoint the region which is responsible for consciousness, that's never gonna, you'll never find it.
And that seems to be the theme.
It's the
also.
result of total brain functioning. And if it's a result of total brain functioning, it's still very complicated because we don't even understand the whole brain. Just think with vision alone, there's over 10 different regions of the brain and more, in fact, responsible just for vision. Vision is very complex. There's a part of your vision that doesn't even have to do with identifying visual forms, like in the neurological illness of blind sight. A person who has blind sight, if you put an object in front of them, like let's say a coffee cup, you move it left to right, they'll not be able to tell you what it is. They'll only be able to tell you the relative movement. It moved left to right, it moved up and down. Is it the shape of a square or a circle or a rectangle? They cannot tell you. But they can tell that there's relative movement. The parts of the brain that would identify the form has been damaged, but not the part of the vision that's detecting relative movement. So then they have so-called blind sight. Even vision is very complex, and that's just an aspect of consciousness, a small aspect of consciousness. So, yeah, it's a monumental feat.
It seems like perhaps like the place to go study is like the rhythm of vibration. I feel like every senses gets a different vibration of consciousness, like perceives it. Like smell is at a different rate of vibration that you can actually absorb into the mind. And if you look at all the senses combined, you get all the layers of consciousness. And there's probably more that you can develop with the cities, and like when you awaken certain faculties within the self, then you perceive even subtler type of vibrations.
Yeah, exactly.
But vibration seems to be the key to all understanding all of it.
So that's like tying it into the involution and evolution thing. It's like the primordial simplicity that is the basis of consciousness, then all those greater levels of complexity. So when we have perception of consciousness, like in lucid dreaming or in meditation, that's a higher level of complexity, right?
Or a simpler.
Oh, I would say no, simpler would be like just conscious, no perception. There's just pure consciousness. There's no reflecting quality.
Because the way I see it is almost like in meditation, you could see the pure white light, while when you awaken in the physical, then you see the division into the 7 spectrums of the colors, like the 7 colors, which is more, complex in its layout. And then the higher, the more kind of concentrated and focused and aligned you become in the mind, the more the initial spark of the creative spark you can perceive, which is the simpler. It's a photon before it gets split up.
Yeah. So that's like when you're working from the layers of complexity to the primordial or greater level of simplicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start from that, but you cannot end there. Like, because if you focus long enough on anything, and that's what we learn in meditation, the more uninterrupted the attention becomes. If you're focusing on the breath disappears. If you're focusing on a chakra, that disappears. If you're focusing on a thought like a mantra, that disappears, because the energy of the mind just becomes far too subtle to hold on to a gross object. So if it's like what you're saying, a spectrum of colors, actually, do you know there's Taraka Yoga, which is the yoga of inner light. It is a specialized kind of yoga where you would close your eyes and you would perceive spectrum of colors, of not just colors, lights of different varieties and colors. Of course, they would be seen as all vibrating at different rates, and they, from that perspective, they would also be inseparable from different rates of the mind's vibrations or consciousness. Similarly, there's the yoga of inner sound, nada yoga, where you perceive a spectrum of auditory phenomena, not from the outside, but hearing it from within yourself. From the gross to the subtle, how does that translate in our subjective experience? But I think that's the key, like, understand there's involution, there's evolution. One goes from simplicity to complexity, one from complexity to greater simplicity. And the homeostasis we talked about earlier is the fine balance between the simple and the complex, the passive and the active, the conceptual and the non-conceptual.
I think we're over the hour. Is there something you wanted to say to kind of wrap everything up, or something that you would want to share before we close?
Well, what are we talking about doing? Maybe next time we do a meditation.
Well, there's the second part, so we're just going to close the first part, and then there's going to be a second part. Yeah.
I didn't know there was a second part.
Yeah, surprise.
I like surprises.
There you go.
Especially with you.
So yeah, do you want to close this with a thought or something that's on your heart for the audience?
I hope the talk today about consciousness illuminates certain things. I really do see it as fundamental to life. Outside of consciousness, there's no knowledge, there's no universe. I'm not saying that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. However, from the perspective of consciousness, there's no knowledge, there's no universe. So therefore, try to find a way of being where self-knowledge becomes inseparable from the movement of life itself. And that is going to transform the meaning of life. Science, technology gives us conveniences. Relationships we cannot depend on exclusively for our well-being. What's the common thread running through all the different areas of one's experience of life? Basic awareness, fundamental consciousness. Connect with that, you don't have a state of mind. You have a way of being. Learn a way of being, because that is transcending any state of mind, and that can embrace all of life. So I think that will help to put us on the right track.
I love that. You have a skill to synthesize information, and I really think this last segment you just said was really a good way to synthesize everything and put it almost like it was the core of everything we've talked about that synthesizes. So I think that ends it beautifully. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we're going to film the second part. So
wonderful. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Namaste.
So this was the solar transmission with Amir Mourad. I hope this conversation has helped you distinguish between the ego's simulation of spiritual growth and the gritty, real work of integration. But remember, the intellect is just half of the vessel. Understanding the map is not the same as walking the terrain. Next Monday, we release the lunar segment, where me and Amir will descend into the dark night of the soul, and you'll get to see a more subjective view of Amir and his own personal experience. And he will guide us through his own interpretation of a technique that he teaches through his yoga teachings, Shunya Yoga. So you will not want to miss that practical application next Monday. Make sure you subscribe and have your notifications on as well, so you can see that pop in your feed. And finally, if you're feeling the pressure rising as we're about to enter into this new year, do not ignore it. The Roze Ephemeris event is live on our YouTube channel, so go check that out. Understand what's coming in this new year for you personally, and how to use your Vedic Astrology chart step by step to figure out a plan to make the most of the year ahead. Thanks for spending the Blue Hour with us. I'm your host, Alex Coma, and I'll see you next Monday.